As we all know, the modern traveler begins her travel with a search for inspirations on Instagram. Okay, I confess, I was being a true millennial, living for the sepia tone filtered photos of otherworldly destinations that filled up my Instagram feed. One day, I was scrolling through my feed when I saw a photo of a girl standing at the very edge of an infinity pool, overlooking a mountainous backdrop. Surrounded by clouds and mist, she struck a single-legged tree pose. So beautiful. I clicked on a geotag and found the remote town of Sapa, population just under 9,000, with terraced rice fields and lush green valleys and villages in the borders of northern Vietnam and China.
Bring your imagination to life with inspiring stories of an incredible and very real world.
The picture is worth 1,000 words, but how often do we pause to think about the stories behind the perfect images we see on social media nowadays? My name is Katy, and I am the author of Photospire.com, a blog site that seeks to inspire traveling through my photos and stories. Trekking to a Hmong village in Sapa is just a backstory. Perhaps more than the adventure it entails, it is about how social media shapes and influences travel. And at the end of the story, hopefully you'll be thinking of this question. In the world of saturated travel photos on Pinterest and Instagram, how have those images brought you to places you didn't know about? And when you get there, do you get to know it at all? And if travel photos tell a story, are you the protagonist or the villain? I found B via the most 21st century way of communication possible, through a search on social media. As we all know, the modern traveler begins her travel with a search for inspirations on Instagram. Okay, I confess, I was being a true millennial, living for the sepia tone filtered photos of otherworldly destinations that filled up my Instagram feed. One day, I was scrolling through my feed when I saw a photo of a girl standing at the very edge of an infinity pool, overlooking a mountainous backdrop. Surrounded by clouds and mist, she struck a single-legged tree pose. So beautiful. I clicked on a geotag and found the remote town of Sapa, population just under 9,000, with terraced rice fields and lush green valleys and villages in the borders of northern Vietnam and China, inhabited by indigenous tribes like the Hmongs. Going further down the rabbit hole, I stumbled upon a travel blog that brought up a name that promised to take me to this mystical land, B. And that was when I searched for her on Facebook. Sapa's beautiful landscape has seen the rise of a now booming tourism industry in a little misty town. I saw that one popular way of connecting with the landscape was by doing a day trek from town center through the valleys to the Hmong villages. There were many tours to choose from, most hovering around 40 USD per person. I didn't mind the price, but also felt like I wanted an experience that was as locally connected as possible. The blog I had read mentioned that B was a local Hmong woman who takes tourists on treks to her village. Despite what I imagined is a land so out of touch with the rest of the world, B not only had established business on Facebook, but also spoke excellent English. I was initially worried about our communications regarding the dates, itinerary, and price, but after a few exchanges, decided to have faith in this stranger I sought out and have yet to meet. My mind was set on discovering the beautiful landscape in the photo, so it didn't matter that we only had a 3-day weekend. My friend and I quickly booked plane tickets for Hanoi and met up after work on Friday. As its location on the map indicates, Sapa wasn't exactly easy to get to. Our flight was delayed due to heavy rain. Well, we were lucky that it wasn't cancelled at all, since there was a typhoon just a few days prior. But we booked for a sleeper train, departing for Sapa just a couple hours after our arrival in Hanoi, and it looks like we weren't going to make it. And what do you know? We made it! The pilot made a smooth landing, and before we even realized it, we landed in Hanoi in the original time. We dashed towards the exits and hailed a cab. In the dark, stormy nights, the cab sped away from the airport and headed towards the address we'd been given for the train station. When the cab pulled into what appeared to be a gated junkyard, my heart raced. Illuminated only by the headlights, I could hardly make out what this place was. It was unlike any train station I knew. I thought the address must be wrong, that he'd taken us to the middle of nowhere. I begged him to not leave until I could see someone in the station. Walking around the compound, I saw an old building shielded from the view by the darkness. There was a huge padlock keeping the doors shut, but I saw a hopeful stream of fluorescent light inside. After pounding incessantly, a heavily pregnant girl came waddling by. Over Google Translations, she told us that the train would be arriving shortly and that we could wait inside. Having a moment to look around, I was surprised by how empty the station was. Not a single passenger in sight except for my friend and I. And this was supposed to be in the middle of Hanoi. The waiting room had rows and rows of dusty blue chairs, and in one corner, a huge statue of a portrait of a man, and desks all stacked together. It was quite creepy. When it was almost time to board, the girl walked with us to the other side of the building. An assistant with rails came into sight in the steamy darkness. We stood just next to the tracks, on a thin strip of raised platform. Slowly, the train pulled up next to us, a long series of old creaky metal boxes. We made it all the way to the last carriage, our dwelling for the night. It was the tiniest room, with 4 bunk beds lining the 2 walls to the sides. In the middle, a small window and table between 2 bottom bunks. There were already people inside, 3 young Vietnamese guys. Thinking that they had a room to themselves, they'd taken over our beds. They apologized and moved up, leaving the bottom bunks for my friend and I. And then we started to introduce ourselves. It turned out they were friends and travel aficionados working in the same company. Traveling on a slow-moving train wasn't their usual cup of tea. One of the guys had gone on a motorbike ride from one end of the country to the other, in the same time it takes for the train to reach Sapa from Hanoi, in 7 hours. His arms were boldly inked, and he proudly showed us a number tattooed on the back of his hand, 3,444. The distance in kilometers he's traveled on his motorbike, from coast to coast. It was World Cup night, and they invited us to stay up and watch a game on their phone. We bonded over endless karaoke sessions of Backstreet Boys, Vietnamese rap songs, and even some Chinese songs. It goes without saying that in the early mornings, as the train rolled into Lao Cai train station, where we would get off and transfer to a car ride to Sapa, we could hardly keep our eyes open. We said a hasty goodbye to our new friends and hopped off the train in search of the new transportation B had arranged for us. We found our driver waiting by a minivan. As the city disappeared behind us and we made our way up bumpy, windy roads, a dreamy landscape came into view. Cascading lush green rice fields lined mountaintops, shrouded by thick gray clouds. Next to me, my friend whispered that he was feeling carsick. A few moments later, a dad yelled for the driver to stop the car. He and his kid clambered out of the car and threw up on the side of the road. I kept my eyes on this incredible view and on the villagers selling barbecue skewers and fruits on this muddy dirt path. We were dropped off at our hotel, a towering 4-story building that stood on yet another slope. On one side, it faced the streets. On the other, it seemed to be built on top of a cliff. The views out of its panoramic windows were both awe-inspiring and intimidating. We were meeting B bright and early for the trek. At 8, she met us in the front doorsteps of the hotel, with 2 girls in tow. As we walked away from the town center and made our way down rocky path, B told us that she'd been hosting check-in tours for over a decade. That was how she learned English. The other 2 girls, one about my age, was her sister. The other one, a girl of about 11, was presumably the niece. All of them wore brightly colored traditional outfits, with frame boots. As the trek went on, the system of all family members doing their part became more apparent, as we saw even more young girls walking up and down the muddy roads, carrying bamboo baskets on their backs. The rain picked up as we descended further down rocky, slippery path. I was poorly dressed for the trek, with my crisp white pants and runners. Bea and the two girls tried their best to balance the umbrella in one hand and a firm grasp on my hand, lest I slip on the rocks and fall into the valleys below. I would slide and squeal at every step. At one point, my shoes were entirely wrapped in mud, and it made no sense to even take steps. Just slide. Finally, as I planted one foot on a rock in front of me, I slipped and fell butt first on a cushy, muddy ground. Now that my shorts were ruined, I felt strangely bolder after that. It wasn't too bad, actually. I'd seen other trekkers with mud prints worse than mine. Judging by the expansiveness of the mud streaks, I could tell how they fell and how far they slid. It became a funny game in my mind. Over the course of 4 hours, we came across astonishing views of the place, unlike any I'd seen before. The rain and the mist, if anything, added to the allure of the landscape. It was something straight out of a Chinese martial arts novel, except that instead of people flying around with swords, the villagers planted their feet in knee-deep soil and mud as they continued to work the fields in the rain. But of course, I was mainly keeping my eyes on the ground. We climbed up and slid down as the clay beneath our feet gave away. We climbed down again and crossed the rapid stream and saw little children setting up shop on the tarp-covered bamboo poles waiting for us. Bea never pushed us to buy anything. In fact, she never said anything. But I could imagine, and certainly could feel, as I stood in the rain and mud, that this was the everyday life for the villagers, rain or shine, young or old. Eventually, we looked down and saw that the valleys were directly under us. Picture this. After 4 long hours, a breathtaking view of the rich green fields, dotted by little huts and a stream that roared through the fields. It was such a moment of disbelief, mixed with relief and gratitude. Bea pointed at a cluster of huts with gray tin roofs, surrounded by the stream and low fence, and said this was her family home. We couldn't descend fast enough. Approaching Bea's huts, we crossed a tiny wooden bridge over the rushing waters, an idyllic landscape, made all the better by the rooster that idly perched on top of the fence. It was a primitive kind of setting. The kitchen, a dim, windowless hut with traditional stoves, was made out of bricks, while some huts were simply put up by wooden planks and supported by long bamboo poles on the roof. In the middle of the cluster, connecting all the huts together, was an open area with long tables and many chairs. This was a dining room. Hung over the wooden beams that supported the structure of the compound were hammocks made out of the same bright green fabric that Bea wore. We were introduced to her husband and her extended family. Her young children cheerfully said, "Hello, how are you?" to us and shook our hands. It was astonishing to hear how comfortably and naturally they spoke English. It was also interesting to see Bea charge her smartphone on the wall plug that was built into the side of the hut. This was all quite different from my expectations, given our surroundings. We were treated to a much-needed, delicious local fare for lunch, and after lunch, some of the younger girls brought out brightly colored woven bracelets to give us, along with plastic bags of goodies to sell. They were selling similar items, mostly hand-dyed and woven pillowcases or shawls, but each seemed to be keeping tabs on the cut they'd been getting. I bought a beautifully woven shawl for my mom, and we bid our goodbye, crossing the bridge through the rice fields, and finally took a very bumpy car ride back to our hotel. Back at town square, shops and restaurants buzzed with business. Scooters blazed through the streets in a stream of honks. The town felt chaotic, with diesel fumes and bright neon signs. The shopkeeper at the convenience store wouldn't do currency exchange with my friend, despite what the sign at the front said, because the amount he wanted to exchange was too little. A cockroach crawled beneath our feet at the restaurant that was obviously catered to tourists, with its English menu. Entrepreneurship seemed to be at the core of the spirits of the local people. Yet I found it slightly disheartening to see how the town center was so packed with people, noises, and lights. On the one hand, it suggested the influx of tourists had brought relative prosperity to the people. But just how much did it bring positive impacts compared to its negative? Later, I would see more young girls donning traditional outfits walking about in the rain, approaching tourists and selling trinkets. I was curious about what one of the girls was carrying on her back and looked closer. It was a baby. Wrapped in almost all the young girls' backs were cloth bundles, their younger siblings. Most of the girls spoke a little English. Those that didn't stuck out their arms with the trinkets in hand, hoping for someone to stop. We shook our heads and moved on, noting how their voices were small and sad. Was it disappointment, or was it a shiver in the breath in the damp, foggy air? I'll wrap up the story here, but I want to talk about the impact of the experience that lingered. I thought about how Bea had established a considerable level of success and comfort for her and her family. Her young ones will no doubt continue to practice English, or as Sapa borders its northerly neighbor, learn Chinese, and one day take on a business or pursue bigger opportunities outside of the little town. Thought about how tourism had become the main drivers for the economy and livelihood for the local people. Yet life for so many of the youth still looked bleak. And then I thought about how I had come to Sapa on a whim, based on a single Instagram photo. How privileged that notion was. In this story, am I the protagonist, achieving self-discovery and enlightenment through my grand heroic journey? Or am I just another social media-driven millennial, contributing to the tourism and economy of a place I never stayed long enough to know, solely for the sake of social gratification? I feel undecided, if only inspired to travel with a different mindset next time. A picture is worth 1,000 words. But maybe we never pause to read beyond face value. Our fingers already scrolling to the next thing on our feed.
Thank you for joining us on another audio adventure right here at Wandertale. Subscribe to our channel to stay tuned for more stories from around the world and share tales with the open-minded, the brave, and the curious.